I am just thrilled to have as our guest speaker today Reece Peck. Reece wrote the book Fox Populism: How Conservatism Became Working Class. I met Reece last November at a gathering related to the diploma divide hosted by Joan Williams, and heard him speak about what he'd learned from his book. We then went out and had, I don't remember if it was a beer or a bourbon later that evening at the bar, but I thought this dude has got to be a Ruby presenter. And so Reece, who grew up working class, I believe he was the first person in his family to attend college, and he's grounded deeply in the working class. And at the same time, he's gone on to be a professor at the College of Staten Island. He also teaches other places. And this book about Fox News and the impact that they have and why they have it is really like nothing else that's out there. So welcome, Reece. So glad to have you. And you can share your screen and we'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Ruby, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me. It's a great honor. I really am thrilled about the Ruby initiative, its mission. And I'm going to talk a little bit. I think when we're talking about the lack of democratic outreach and connection with rural voters, you're probably going to see some overlap with just working class people overall. And my sister was the first, technically, but we are among the first generation. So our parents and our grandparents and their grandparents didn't go to college. Just a quick fact check, I guess. So let me just get started right away. Okay, so in 2000, Bill O'Reilly said that his Fox show was, quote, the only show from a working class point of view. And liberals and progressives found this laughable. O'Reilly's show and the network consistently boosted a party inflicting deep wounds on working class people, undermining unions, blocking more affordable health care, starving public services through tax cuts on the rich. So how could he possibly represent a working class audience? Now, one of the answers to this question is how Fox News uses what I call cultural populism. Cultural populism is a type of political discourse that champions the common wisdom, taste, and intellectual capacities of everyday people and denounces justifications of power based on credentials and elite cultural knowledge. So my book details how Fox News uses cultural populism to push an understanding of social class as a cultural identity as opposed to an economic position. Fox pundits go out of their way to perform their working classness, which involves a host of presentational techniques, from rhetorical attacks against educated elites in the professional middle class, from making references to lifestyle choices that are related to the working class, to tabloid aesthetics, to using working class bases of knowledge, i.e. common sense. Chiefly, Fox News pundits repeat the classic conservative media narrative about how liberals look down on ordinary Americans as stupid and morally inferior. Ultimately, Fox's conception of social class is deceptive in that it conceals corporate America's role in creating economic inequalities. The Democratic left should nonetheless pay close attention to the aspects of Fox's populist style that do make compelling class identifications. So it is only, So in this talk, I will illustrate how Fox News uses cultural populism to create powerful points of identification with working class news consumers. Oops. Now, millennials came of age in a political world that Fox News created. Hence, the prevalence of the power of conservative media in their lives feels almost inevitable, as if it sprung organically from the reactionary bedrock of the country. But this kind of myopic perspective overlooks the deeper history of right-wing media, a history that was riddled with far more failed attempts to appeal to working class people than hits. There was a host of conservative TV news projects in the early 90s that history has all but forgotten. Media startups like Newt Gingrich's National Empowerment and Television assumed that they would prosper simply by stamping their network Republican and dishing out the good gospel of Reagan conservatism. Yet upon reviewing the tape, NET and other Fox News prototypes were hopelessly unentertaining. Think right-wing PBS. Fox News succeeded where these failed efforts didn't because it offered more than conservative ideology. Fox provided its audience with a populist identity to emotionally invest in and an underdog political story that it could rally around. The prevailing explanation for conservative media revolution of the last 3 decades is wrong, I argue. The greatest examples of conservative media success, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, did not simply tap an undiscovered market of conservative ideologues. Instead, they used tabloid aesthetics, populist narratives, and blue-collar TV personalities to draw a popular audience in, and once they had that audience attracted, they pushed that audience rightward. So it was only when the conservative movement started to think more strategically about its communication style that its media fortunes changed. So how about I offer some examples of how cable news in the 2000s and the 2010s constructed the partisan camps of America, right? Or represented them, but I would argue like literally created the way we think about them. So this is a clip from the O'Reilly Factor from 2009, which is really Fox News' flagship program. It put Fox News in the driver's seat for the next 20 years, and it's the quintessential Fox News show.
Number 1 in cable news, 100 months and counting.
You're either a moron or a liar. What kind of a sentence is that?
No spin, no agenda, just the truth.
The American people have a right to be angry. What? Stop the BS.
100 months at number 1. The O'Reilly Factor, Fox News Channel. Be here.
Now I'm going to play a clip from the Rachel Maddow show in the same era, which is, of course, the partisan opposite of Fox News. And I want you guys to pay attention to its style and how markedly different it is from O'Reilly's. I really wish you could hear the music and his sound bites, but can you hear this?
Yep.
Okay.
It's about finding all the disparate facts and then finding their coherence. Doing this right takes rigor and a devotion to facts that borders on obsessive. So what's the explanation for what happened? At the end of the day, though, this is about what's true in the world. Good evening. We begin tonight with the story that no one is talking about.
So people often draw equivalences between the conservative Fox News and the liberal MSNBC due to their common adoption of a partisan branding strategy. However, this superficial commonality tells us little about the stark differences we see in how these two networks represent themselves and their audience. The Factor promo, uses populist language and scenes of confrontation that depict O'Reilly as a fighter, as a champion of the little guys. You may have seen right in the text. Rating numbers are touted to crown the Factor as the voice of the majority. Maddow, on the other hand, is presented as a researcher, a writer, an intellectual. Her cultural authority rests on her devotion to rigorous empiricism and sound research. It's an appeal designed for an audience who especially prides themselves as being members of the fact-based community. So in these ads, we see two competing consumer appeals. The first is what I call cultural populist, and the second is what I call culturally aspirational. These stylistic orientations are by no means exclusive to the cable news field. They shape and direct the marketing strategies of print, radio, and online news outlets as well. As a television commercial for the venerable New York Times in the same era provides an even more illustrative example of this aspirational news appeal. And so let me play this quickly. So this is a New York Times ad.
I think it was the Sunday style that brought us together.
I think it was a
Eric?
review. Getting the Times delivered for me, well, that's really the best part of the weekend. That's why I love the weekend.
It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday subscription that puts you in the center of the conversation.
The depth and breadth of reporting, the insight.
Call the 800 number and you save 50%.
Just $3.45 a week delivers the world to your home.
The best deal around. How many sections are you fluent in?
I'm fluent in 3 sections, actually. Business, travel, the book review.
Sunday styles.
You call the toll-free number and you save 50%.
He likes the deal.
I do.
I just went to Spain and the travel section helped me plan my trip.
So you call the 800 number and you save 50%.
50% off home delivery? Fantastic.
The best journalists in the world work for the Times, and there's no debate about it. So
There we go. Okay. So prestige news organizations like the New York Times and NPR stress their commitment to objective reporting, but they also associate their subscribers with the professional class social world and a cosmopolitan lifestyle. So even though these outlets bend over backwards to show their professionalism, they're still predominantly viewed as liberal and by conservatives as far left. This points to the problem with assuming that the partisan mapping of the news environment is based solely on the oppositional ideological biases of the outlets. In these promos, we can see the indirect ways that the marketing strategies of these news outlets actually create political associations through their voice, through their aesthetic, through the people they feature. So moving beyond Fox's marketing, I want to show you how Fox in its programming actually positions itself as a counter-elite network for the working class.
Would they be embarrassed? Look, they still make it
They're
good.
embarrassed because
They make a good living. I mean, all the network newscasts make
hear
money. The morning programs do very, very well.
Because
I don't understand
they're
Koppel's
upset.
beef. Nightline without Koppel, it was more successful than it was with Koppel.
this is about the elitist snobbery, the monarchy having to realize and not liking the fact that barbarians and peasants have taken over. We're the commoners, you guys.
Well, that's
And
true.
that's
I mean,
that they can't stand.
if there ever
I
were
think
a
it's happening in
barbarian,
politics, and it's happening here.
Tammy Ellis is right on it. If there ever were a barbarian taking over, you're looking at it. Okay?
So, you know, many of you may find this claim by wealthy TV hosts that they're the commoners to be ridiculous, right? But I think focusing on what just is fake about that misses a broader point. It's like kind of not useful. What's more useful is to consider how Fox News claims this populist symbolic territory in the world of news. A positionality, I would add, that liberal news outlets are almost completely uninterested in trying to assume themselves. So for the most part, liberal news outlets are quite comfortable with this system of associations whereby liberals are marked as intellectual and conservatives are marked as working class and tabloid. So even though MSNBC replicates Fox's opinion-heavy primetime lineup, its anchors with their stylish, thick black glasses still maintain the network's original kind of upper-class aspirational appeal as the hipper, smarter news organization. So for instance, MSNBC's Morning Joe markets itself as, quote, the thinking viewer's choice, a not-so-subtle dig at its allegedly non-thinking competitor in the morning, which is Fox and Friends. So depicting liberals as more intellectual may flatter liberal audiences, and it has worked to maintain a small but financially reliable niche for democratically aligned news organizations like CNN and MSNBC. Accepting this market configuration, as opposed to actively trying to contest it and transform it, has had and will continue to have dire political ramifications for those that are seeking to combat right-wing populism. So in chapter 3 of my book, I show how Fox pundits perform working class identity in two fundamental ways. One through appeals to working class aesthetics and taste, and the other through appeals to working class knowledge, i.e. common sense. So Fox's graphics use icons of car culture and Americana and the mythologies of Route 66. As you see with this mosaic of license plates on my left, it's something one might find in, let's say, like an Applebee's restaurant, right? Fox's hyper-patriotic set designs also work to communicate the program's working class taste politics. Obviously, this patriotic visual branding supports its hyper-nationalistic politics as well, but it also serves to distance Fox News from the taste culture of educated professionals who tend to see such fulsome displays of patriotism as tacky or corny. So in addition to citing their working class childhoods, Fox News pundits attempt to perform their ordinariness with taste and lifestyle references. At the close of every broadcast, Hannity postures like a quarterback and throws a Nerf football to an unseen person off set. During discussion panels, Hannity will frequently mention sports-related events using sports analogies. Like every other Joe Sixpack, he'll goad his guests who support rival teams, etc. They'll mention their affinity for working class restaurants, with Bill O'Reilly saying he eats at Red Lobster, and then their affinity for working class forms of music like country music, which is really important, right? So the host that's done the most to draw this association between conservatism and country music is Sean Hannity. So in 2003 and 2004, he sponsored these freedom concerts that featured, you know, top country artists. And then likewise in the programming, Fox News will have on famous country singers. And with their physical build, their clothing style, their plain spoken, usually Southern voices, they serve a symbolic purpose. They add a working class feel to the otherwise stuffy business professional class environment of news. In a reciprocal fashion, these country singers utilize Fox News to propel their country music persona and associate it with Republican partisanship, a political badge that affirms their rural identity and working classness. So here's a quick clip of John Rich, who's like the Dr. Dre of country music in Nashville, playing at a Tea Party rally in 2009 in Atlanta.
Country music superstar, my good friend John Rich, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. My daddy taught me in this country everyone's the same. You work hard for your dollar and you never pass the lane when it don't go your way. Now I see all these big shots whining on my evening news about how they're losing billions, and it's up to me. And
so the irony about this is many of the main Republican leaders at the time, where they were using this song about the plight of auto workers in Detroit, were like Mike Pence and Romney were writing op-eds that said they should let Detroit go bankrupt. And Obama was the one actually trying to aid these auto workers. So the contradictions abound policy-wise, but the style is coded as conservative, right? The country style. And so I'm way over time. I'm going to try to speed through some of this. I mean, how am I with time? I wanted to get to the end.
You have about 10 minutes total.
10 minutes. All those technical difficulties really screwed me up.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a clip. Another way that they try to associate not just with working class tastes, but they understand there's a connection between smarts and taste, right? You either have good taste, but it also means you're intelligent, right? These constructions and stereotypes about intelligence are connected to taste. So Fox News tries to emulate what I call a popular intellect, like a working class style of news analysis. And we can see this epitomized by Glenn Beck's comment that he's not an expert, but he is a thinker.
Here's what's coming. Inflation. Now, you listen to the people on television, and look, I'm not an economist. I'm a high school educated guy. And maybe that's why I can see things that other people can't, because I don't have that big old head where it's been filled by the so-called experts. I pursue these things myself. I try to figure it out myself.
So, rather, you can see here, rather than regarding his lack of a college degree as a shortcoming, Beck was asserting that this gave him an insight that other more pedigreed analysts do not have. And this connection between tastes and smarts is implicitly here when he interviews country star Trace Atkins. He says, I wanted to have you on because one thing I liked about you is the first thing when I met you, you said once in a while you get so fed up, you just go out to your tractor and plow the field. And I thought of Thomas Jefferson when he said that he'd much be rather judged by a farmer and a man who has his hands in the soil than anybody in a university or a learned man. So the notion that Americans' universities are indoctrinating the youth is the bête noire of Fox News. It's a long-standing narrative. Tucker Carlson on Fox News had a whole segment called Campus Craziness. And this is a powerful antagonism, actually, as we see in the last two election cycles in 2016 and even more so in 2020. The most salient political division is this division between the college educated and the non-college educated, and conservative media is quite aware of this, right? Now there's another element that's not just about taste and knowledge, but there's also an active attempt on Fox News to say that the working class is morally and socially aligned with the business class. So my chapter 4, I really dig into this aspect of it. So throughout Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, his surrogates and conservative media referenced him as a job creator. And this term is very important because it is what is used by conservatives to define rich businessmen like Trump as producers, right? This discourse of producerism is very old in American politics. And Fox News reconfigured this old political discourse to include CEOs and corporate managers in the moral community of producers alongside the venerated working class. So when translated into moral terms of producer populism, the privileged position of business elites like Trump is redefined as the product of his hard work. So by this logic, all actors whose worth is defined by the market share a solidarity as workers. Conservative hosts and pundits on Fox News emphatically argue that the business class and the wealthy are workers too. In fact, these job creators are the hardest workers. They're kind of like the super workers who don't even sleep, like Elon Musk, right, and Donald Trump. So when depicting the business world, often conservatives use a discourse of what I call market empiricism. And this is a notion that the market is a pragmatic place that most accurately reflects imperial reality, aka the real world. In contrast to the public sector, which is represented as a sphere of distorted reality that has been created by those who want to selfishly insulate themselves from the moral obligation to work. Government figures are depicted as ideologically driven proponents of social engineering who only have over-intellectualized knowledge. So unlike public sector workers and politicians, business figures are driven by practical concerns and rely on apolitical utilitarian knowledge. And so businessmen populists like Trump are not only defined against government workers, but also against academics and activists who also do not measure their worth in market terms. So on Fox News, all private sector actors, big corporations or small businesses, are presented as having a greater sense of economic realism than those working in the public sector or those racialized groups receiving public aid. Conservative media consistently frames Trump's business background as a sign of his outsider status. This is why he's not a career politician. So I'm going to end here. So what do we do about Fox News? The hard truth is the only real way to counter conservative media is to build a news network that matches its popular appeal and cultural relevance. And to do that, one must adopt a clear-eyed assessment of why right-wing outlets like Fox News have been so successful in the first place. So when we only focus on how they deceive their audience with bad science or blatant lies, the analyst is distracted from seeing how the network has actually achieved its wide cultural authority, particularly with working class people. Liberal commentators have chastised free market conservatives for peddling this fiction that America is a classless world, classless society, a criticism that's warranted. Yet when it comes to their own media analysis, these same liberal voices consistently overlook how the U.S. Media market is itself shaped by opposing class-based appeals. Liberal news outlets overlook how the U.S. market, liberal news outlets can claim to champion working class communities until they're red in the face. But such rhetoric rings hollow when the prevailing voice and aesthetic of liberal news caters so clearly to a college-educated professional middle class. So the progressive media sphere must strive not only to shore up college-educated base, though it must keep that too, but it must also help build a broader coalition. It must challenge conservative media by competing directly for working class communities. It must speak to the working class audiences that conservatives, it must challenge conservative media by competing directly for working class audiences by telling stories about that world that speak to their tastes and their experiences. It must also speak to working class audiences that conservatives have little toehold in so far, like urban Black ones, or in communities that they're gaining steadily with, like Hispanic ones. It must expand the stylistic range well beyond, let's say, Democracy Now! Or NPR's Fresh Air. At least in some of its ventures, it must embrace tabloid aesthetics and energy. Too often, liberal media shun tabloid styles in the name of intellectual complexity, but do so at their political peril. Again, the cultural liberal media market, with its middle-brow sensibility, is primarily aimed at affluent, college-educated audiences, a demographic that is solidly progressive, and isn't going anywhere anytime soon, right? To grow the progressive coalition, we need to reach working class independents who lack a fixed ideological identity. And to do that, there needs to be a concerted effort to create a sector of left or progressive media that uses an entirely different voice to occupy an entirely different class cultural lane. And this is closing. The right's best propagandists intuitively understand that much of real media persuasion happens before the debate even occurs. It's a matter of creating long-term social bonds between media and audiences so that when the moment for arguing the right's case arrives, a large portion of the public are already pulling for conservatives to win the exchange of ideas. By now, it should be evidently clear that we are not going to fact check our way out of the culture war and create a world where third-party experts are once again revered. We don't want to get trapped in this endless loop whereby conservative media partisans like Tucker Carlson defend their claim that January 6th was an inside job by simply countercharging that it's the experts, not him, who live in a world where politics trump truth. So we need a long-term effort to develop a new progressive media sector that could transform the political terrain in a manner that puts conservative cultural warriors on their back heels, especially on the question of class. I will conclude by asking you to imagine a future where progressive media makers are better than the right at speaking to working class identities, morals, and knowledge, and could do so without fudging the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Reece. If you would unshare your screen and we will go ahead and get into the conversation. Thank you very much for I'm sorry for the technical problems. I know how incredibly frustrating that is, but you made it through and the presentation was full of fantastic content. So I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat. We'll start there. And Jackie, at some point, I think we need to go with Reece still highlighted, but otherwise to the full gallery of folks so we can see raised hands. A couple of questions, really, you started to discuss at the very end, Reece, but maybe you could get into a little more particulars about this. It's the question of basically what can the left do? Carol has said that she understands and gets what you're saying totally, but she doesn't like the idea of pandering, like just, putting on some sort of stereotypical working class or rural kind of veneer. It has to be genuine. So how would you suggest they do that? Or have there been attempts where outlets like CNN or MSNBC had more sort of down-to-earth working class people and then they didn't stick with them? What's the answer there?
Well, one thing I couldn't add because you always have to cut something. But at the end of my book, I want to make clear that Fox News actually, while I showed you the most stereotypical ways and the most simplistic ways they represent working class identity, they're actually more sophisticated than what I showed you. Like, they do acknowledge that working class people have a desire to participate in an intellectual culture. They want to hear studies. They want to hear from historians and experts. And what's amazing about Fox News is how it features conservative experts that'll do, a segment on, let's say, the history of the Great Depression, which is not the sexiest tabloid topic, but they'll keep the elitism of the academics they have on at arm's length. And the everyday host will kind of counter and add experience about his parents, right, and how they lived through the Great Depression. But then they'll talk about facts again and statistics. So they're much more ambidextrous, right? They have these different appeals, and I find that I'm jealous of it, right? From a if you're on the progressive side, you wish you had a kind of media that incorporated multiple voices and multiple ways to make arguments. Where I think in the liberal media, they're one-dimensional, right? They're pretty much just focus on the experts, and that's the way to make an argument, and trust them, and that's that, right? And so, I also don't think the progressive version of this by no means should mirror exactly what the conservatives are doing, right? We can learn insights from them, but it's not going to look the same, and it doesn't have to look the same. But there was a moment where they had Ed Schultz, who was the closest you can think to a barnstorming Midwest big guy, former football player, talked about unions, had labor unions on, and I thought he did a pretty good job of balancing, these more kind of professional class ways to make arguments that we associate with the history of television news in America and politics, but also not just limiting himself to those kind of arguments and those voices. You know, I was thinking about January 6th. We should have less people like me talking about January 6th and interview working class people, citizens, and have them. What do you think about January 6th? Rather than always have a professor or an expert that's weighing in on it. But I mean, so I guess that I get what you mean. Like, we don't want to stereotype and act like, you know, working class people are so simple and they're so against education. I don't even think Fox News does that, even though Glenn Beck said that thing and he's a big old head. Even that's contrived because they do feature a lot of conservative intellectuals. So I guess that'd be two parts of the question.
Okay. Edward has made the comment and question that he says, don't plenty of progressive elites actually think that working class people are inferior intellectually and morally? And if that is the case, I don't know if you agree with that, but if that is the case, how would they, you know, authentically speak as equals with working class people if they really don't think they're equal?
I mean, honestly, a lot of leftists think all we have to do is get a bunch of money to fund media and that'll fix our problems. I think that is the problem. There's a cultural prejudice that has to be broken among factions of the left coalition, a progressive coalition. It's a huge problem, that it is a very real feeling about the professional middle class people looking down on working class people, not even trying to reach those audiences when they create news projects. They don't even contest them. They don't even think of shows that would appeal to them. So to me, that is a sign of devaluing, to be honest, whether it's morally or intellectually. And so I think it isn't just that we don't have a Rupert Murdoch that's going to give us $500 million. I think that cultural prejudice toward the working class by people that are in the leadership of the party and the leadership of the journalism community is a huge problem.
And in that vein, and then I see that we also have some raised hands, but I'm going to go with another question or two from the chat, and then we'll go to the folks raising their hand. Murray has made the comment that the Minneapolis Star Tribune now has a columnist that is entirely focused on rural Minnesota. And he said that he's been asking the public radio station to have programs that are entirely focused on rural. You could say rural or working class, rural and working class. Do you think that's a fruitful way to begin to move into that world, is simply by focusing some of your staff and your programming on that specific audience, rural/working class?
Yeah, I don't think we have to give up NPR or MSNBC or the New York Times. They have their place, but it's just to recognize it's monolithic. That style is the only style, pretty much, right? So when you have a variety, or at least an alternative, that would at least complicate the progressive media environment, and the liberal centrist, the progressive, where I see it is stylistically homogeneous. It's mostly middle brow. And Fox has Wall Street Journal, which is for elites and business elites and professionals, and it has the New York Post, and it has Fox News and talk radio. It has a range of from lowbrow to middlebrow to highbrow, and that is just better as a movement, smarter as a movement. I saw someone mention Bo of the Fifth Column, one of my favorite YouTubers, a great example of existing YouTube independent progressive media people that are doing what I'm actually advocating for. They just don't have the money in funding and visibility. So that's another part of the story. We don't have to invent the wheel totally. There are already progressive, rural, working class, progressive people, and country singers that are progressive, by the way, that are authentic and don't seem forced, and that could be leveraged as personalities and voices. And so, yeah, I like the idea of having something dedicated, but I don't think just having local outlet in Minnesota, or let's say Wisconsin or West Virginia, is enough. I really do think Americans, we are national media people. We all consume the big national media, and it has to have the flash and flare and high production value and appeal to working class masses that want popular media. And it can't just be like local news and people will just like it because of that, and it's local. It's not enough. People want to be engaged, and anyways, rambling a little bit, but that's what I
great. One more question from the chat is from Beth. She's asking if you are familiar with Tom Hartman's podcast, and if so, what does he capture some of the appeal to working class? Does he get some of that vibe, or what is your opinion?
Tom Hartman, he is like been a long time progressive talk radio host, right? If I'm correct. You know, I
I
don't.
was actually
Oh
on
yeah.
his show, my first campaign for Congress.
Oh,
times.
yeah. I think he was part of Air America too, and he's always been there in any attempt to create like progressive media. To be honest, I can't speak from an informed opinion to really say what Tom Hartman's style is or what it's not. You know, I think of Hightower, if you remember the Texas politician Hightower, Jim Hightower, that had a show on Air America. Like that is like country music, wearing a country hat, progressive. And he was in the legacy of older Southern Democrats that were progressive. Big Jim Folsom, who was Alabama Governor George Wallace's mentor, who was not bad on race. He was actually progressive before. So there is a lane there, but I don't know. I can't say enough about Hartman to really weigh in on that.
Okay. All right. Let's go to some raised hands. We'll start with Laura. Go ahead, Laura. Come off mute and ask your question.
Hi. So you sort of started to answer the question that I was thinking about, which is sort of like the bread tubers, like Bausch and Destiny, and like the political live streamers, stuff like that. That's like geared towards a younger audience. And I know basically we've been talking a lot about content creation on YouTube versus like the mainstream flash. And I think you're totally correct in that we need like a big national news, catchy sort of situation. Now I've forgotten my question though.
Well, but are you saying that like there is this progressive sector of YouTube and there is a network of independent people that are speaking to young people in their aesthetic and their dialect, and you see promise in that? I don't know. I'm trying to maybe
yeah. So how do we like broaden that, or do you have any experience with like viewing like political streamers on like Twitch or YouTube or whatever like that? And would you see? I see it as like a more of a populist working class message, because they kind of mix everything from, you know, games and such to you know, to deep dive research on things with their audience.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot. I've done writing on the Young Turks, which is the oldest progressive YouTube show. And you know, David Pakman, I've done an interview with him and interviewed some Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk. And then, you know, Twitch streamers, Hassan Piker, which is the nephew of Cenk Uygur, the founder of, you know, Young Turks. And what I like about the Twitch streamers is they get something that conservatives kind of intuitively understand, is that politics isn't good news programs and political channels. They bridge the divide between politics and popular culture. So Twitch is about gaming. There's all these young men that love gaming, and we don't think that that is proper politics. But in fact, often pop culture, like you're a Knicks fan, right, in New York, or you're a football fan, that's the entry point into politics. And kind of conservatives understand that, right? And that's why they feature, you know, Lou Holtz, and they feature country singers and as pundits, as actual commentators. And a lot of liberals laugh at that. They're like, what do they know about inflation or the Russian-Ukraine war? But they're not seeing how that they're connecting the dots between politics and culture. And I think that that's what these Twitch streamers do. They start with video games, which is huge. My son is obsessed with them, like probably a lot of your kids. And then they blend it into politics. So I think that is really important. And Hassan Piker, he talks like a bro. He sounds like a bro. He, you know, has a certain aesthetic that attracts young men away from the Andrew Tates of the world, who are gross misogynistic right wingers, you know. So I think there is my problem with them is they're all disconnected. They don't cross promote each other. The conservatives, for claiming they're libertarians and they're individualists, they really act like collectivists. They move in a movement. And it's ironic that liberals are called the collectivists, but they're so careerist and individual. They They don't cross promote. They don't think like a movement. So that's the problem with BreadTube in that independent sector.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you, Reece. Yeah. Bruce, you have a question. You come off.
Yes, thanks so much, Reece. Lots of insight, lots of really important information. But there's another aspect of this. First, I'm originally from Missouri. I've lived in Pennsylvania, 36 years in Texas, 10 years in Georgia, 4 years in Florida. There's a generality that applies to all of them. If you look at actions in the state legislatures, there are consistently dramatic differences between the legislators representing rural areas and those representing urban areas. And it crosses a huge gamut of issues. Voting rights, sexual, ethnic minorities, racial minorities, funding of education, environmental issues, climate change, and if you monitor almost any state legislature across this country, you will find uniformly, and these are not manufactured as a result of watching Fox. These are profoundly felt differences that present major conflicts in determining the path forward across a huge gamut of issues. These are not imagined, they're not manufactured, they're not artificial. They are real and they dominate almost every state in this country.
So maybe if I'm kind of tease out from your comment, you're saying that, look, the media has limited power. These are more deep rooted. They go beyond the media.
Absolutely.
I would say that it's the relationship between partisan audiences and partisan media is symbiotic. It's co-constitutive, right? It's not that there wasn't existing conservative beliefs and then Fox News just swooped in and created them. It's that Fox News tapped them, amplified them, and then pushed them, right? So you can be conservative, but what does that mean? 4 years ago, did anyone care about vaccines? Did anyone there's so many issues that Fox will turn into a partisan issue. And a lot of the research shows, political science research shows, that when you ask people on the ground what their views are, they can be quite heterodox. They can be for gun rights, but kind of maybe think that the rich should pay more in taxes. But what they're very sure of is they hate liberals. So it is called effective polarization is the term for it, is that they're emotionally against this outgroup, this despised outgroup. And then once the politicians combined with the media are able to tap that dislike for that enemy other, those liberals, those progressives, they can get them to buy into a host of policy issues that they may not, that they may not originally cared about, right? My grandpa was atheist, even though I grew up in a Mormon family with my mom's side. He never cared about God, but then he started watching Fox News. He had some conservative views, but they pushed him in a particular direction. So I'm not saying you're wrong, that I would never say that Fox News created their ideology out of whole cloth and there wasn't a regional, belief systems there. But I would say that it isn't also organic. Like the policies that they support is not purely organic from that regional culture either. I think it's a mix. It's a mix between the media and those existing cultural views.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the comment, Bruce, and thanks for that elaboration. So I'm looking back to see, I'm wondering, Cody or Jackie, if you can catch any questions in the chat that I've missed at this point. Some of them I didn't specifically ask, but they kind of came up in the context of Laura's question and Reece's response, a lot around social media, for instance, there. I don't know if you want to elaborate any further there beyond YouTube. There was one person who did ask the question, are you speaking primarily about television news? Obviously you are when you're talking about Fox, but does your argument about the capitalizing and cultivating the taste and the working class aesthetic and knowledge base, does that go beyond TV in print media and radio, et cetera?
100%. I mean, the thing about cable, when cable came around and broke the triopoly of NBC, CBS, and ABC, was that it changed the economics of television, and TV companies said we have to focus more on a hardcore loyal niche, and we have to appeal to their identity and their emotion. It's not a Big Ten anymore, right? We're going to focus on identity. So YouTube and social media is exactly like that. It has the same kind of orientation toward emotionally explosive content and building a hardcore fan base, right? So you can be successful with a small group of people as long as they're militant, as long as they're fanatical fans and loyal consumers of your content. And then that group can have outsized influence in the broader internet, right? And so I think that the dynamics are very similar. There are some special qualities that are different from cable news. And I will say that cable news is dying. You know, there was a recent article and study that came out that said most people that watch cable news and broadcasts are now they're boomers and even older. There's very few people under the boomer generation that haven't cut the cable cord already. And so right now, you know, and the cable companies are scrambling to catch up with this over-the-top streaming market and this independent sphere of media influencers that are starting to dictate the agenda. I mean, look at Joe Rogan, for example, you know, versus Fox News, a Fox News host versus Joe Rogan's influence, right? So you're seeing a shift happen in media and in video that's moving toward almost completely the online space, and cable news's influence is waning. But I will always tell people, grandma and grandpa are still very important in people's network of kinship network. And what your grandpa and grandma believe politically, it affected me. My grandma lived in my house, you know, so like to just dismiss elderly people because that's mainly what the Fox News audience is, I think is short-sighted. I think that doesn't quite get at the authority that elderly people can have in certain communities. But as far as where the media trends are going, cable is dying, and independent video and streaming is on the rise. And so that'll be whether Fox News or CNN adapts and reinvents themselves in this online space remains to be seen.
Okay. And in that vein, I'm looking back through the chat, couple of things. One, Carol says, sounds like we need grandmas talking about fear of losing Social Security and country music celebrities talking to folks. I mean, a couple people have hinted at that. Is there really, keeping in mind this question of being genuine, of some real elite biases towards working class and rural, which do exist for plenty of liberal elites, what's to stop the main outlets of the liberal media from simply starting to bring more ordinary people in to share their wisdom and celebrate it as wisdom? What, aside from our own biases about that, what is there value in considering that?
I mean, I go back in my book, there's a chapter on Ed Schultz, or there's a section on Ed Schultz, and it's called Cold Shoulder for Liberal Populists. And it's about how Ed Schultz, his programming was rating well. It was even challenging Maddow in any given night. So it wasn't a matter of a calculated business decision, just cold ratings analysis. It was because his style was off-brand for the middle-brow cosmopolitan brand that you know, MSNBC was going for. And sometimes the economics of news is automatically inherently tilted toward upper-class news consumers because they have the most disposable income, they're the most desirable demographic. And so, I mean, this is what genius about Rupert Murdoch. He broke that formula. He said, I'm going to go for the working class masses. They called the New York Post his market shoplifters, where they called them the Nike and Dorito market, right? They mocked Murdoch's attempt to get a huger net, and they're not as desirable and affluent, but if you grow them big enough, in their net total will make you profitable. And he had a mass kind of working class strategy, and there's nothing stopping a liberal network from doing that, staying profitable, maybe even becoming more profitable and actually more politically influential. And in Schultz, but I would say it's that it wasn't his policies, it was his style that they hated. They thought he was hokey, they thought he was over the top, they thought he was too emotional, and it hurt their other host brand. It wasn't on brand for MSNBC. So it's a really cautionary tale where there was a moment where they could have imagined to do, and this was right with the Wisconsin labor rights protests, and Ed Schultz was showing up at them. He had union figures on as pundits, not just as people to interview, but as talent. He realized that union people could be TV talent. They could add a different kind of voice and style. We see with Sean Fain, how good that guy is on TV. Imagine if Sean Fain had a show, the UAW president, right? So I think it's just a matter of cultural disposition and prejudice, or wanting to go to one brand and one economic model when there are other economic models you could choose from. And Fox News shows that.
Yeah. I'm going to try to get in another half a dozen questions. We'll keep rolling. I'm seeing a lot of new ones in the chat. Jackie, let me know if somebody has raised their hand. So Mark has made the comment that he thinks the Fox Republican system, kind of linking the whole thing, is much better developed than the MSNBC Democrat system. And specifically, Mark comments that MSNBC is not really fighting against tax breaks for the rich or putting more money in rural areas, and that wealthy are kind of waffling on questions of support for the working class, so that it's more than just the media. That's what Mark is contending. I'll tell you, Mark, that from Ruby's point of view, that's absolutely what we believe, and we've been fighting to change. It's way more than style. It's way more than presentation. It's the substance too. But what's your view of that one, Reece?
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny that there's kind of baked in incentives for these corporate executives that own these media companies. They want the tax breaks, right? Who owns the companies? So they're not going to support big social programs, if it means cutting, digging into their wealth, right? And so I do think that for progressives, when you exist in a commercial media system, you're fighting an uphill battle, where if you're conservative and you believe in capitalism and free markets and the business class can do no wrong, you're preaching to the choir of the very executives that own those media companies, right? So I think that I think there's some huge truth in that, but I don't think I always think that at the end of the day, though, like, you can still grow if your audience is massive and you're a successful media company and you develop a loyal base. Even if you're promoting, those pundits are getting that audience by promoting progressive policies that actually help working class people, you've still grown a giant audience, and it's still going to make you fantastically wealthy. There still is a lane, there's fissures in this system, right? Where you could, if for just sake of, look at Michael Moore's documentaries. They made him fantastically wealthy, right? And it was very progressive and very, going against kind of the corporate oligopoly. But I think, and one thing that fascinates me, the difference between Murdoch and MSNBC, or Fox News with Murdoch, is that MSNBC and CNN operate more like typical corporations. They don't have an ideological bent to them. They're purely about the bottom line, where Murdoch has always harmonized his political ideological goals with his commercial profit motives, right? He has his cake and eat it too. He's like a throwback to the tycoons of William Randolph Hearst or Joseph Pulitzer. These news barons in the late 19th century were extremely profitable, but they were very political creatures, and they had crusades. So they were getting rich, but Joseph Pulitzer was more progressive, and Randolph Hearst was very right-wing, nearly fascist, right? And so I don't think, I think it's that the liberal media we have operates like a hive, identityless corporation. They're just there. They're GE, General Electric, they're Microsoft. They're these companies that have these big boards, where with Murdoch, he is an ideological creature who wants to be wealthy, but he consistently shows that he can do both, be politically impactful and have immense profit.
Okay, a couple more. A number of people have asked, what can an individual do? And then while you're pondering that, Beth has asked about the working class female voice in this, because most of what you've talked about is kind of a macho aesthetic. Is it different for women in the way Fox addresses that? What's the deal there?
Yeah, so I have a chapter where I talk about the feminine populist style of conservative women. And I talk about how their pundits, their women pundits, figure out a kind of feminine point of identification within these broader narratives about the liberals being class elitists, right? And some of that is the way they perform this hyper femininity, where you could say, well, they just do that to have eye candy for the male viewers. But I think that misses the fact that the majority of the viewers of Fox News are women. So how do you square that, right? And so I think that those women are more relatable on Fox News, maybe because the way they dress, that they're more confrontational. They don't perform this perfect professional kind of prudish style that you see other women pundits in professional middle class news. I think. Oh, sorry, I have a call I need to stop. It just interrupted my frame. So I think that if you look at the conservative women, can you see me or am I?
Yeah, you're still good.
I think I think you're right. There's an element that's anger we associate with masculinity, confrontation we associate with masculinity. But I think we want to be careful not to essentialize, as if, women, working class women are not angry about the fact their kids don't have, good schools, or that, predatory banks are making it possible to afford houses because they're buying up all the affordable housing. Mary Lease was the most famous populist speaker of the Populist Party of the late 1880s. And she was an Irish working class firebrand. And she was the most popular speaker. And she would mix discourse about being a mother with discourse about being a fighter and a populist. But I hear you. There are some, you want to be careful not to have this kind of toxic, ultra macho like style. But you also don't want to say that women pundits can't be confrontational or show anger or show emotion. And it's funny because Bill O'Reilly, in a lot of ways, took his style not necessarily, not just from like male populists of the past, but I think he really learned from Oprah, where Oprah Winfrey, she was the first one to show on daytime talk shows how powerful it could be to show your vulnerability, your emotional vulnerability, to have testimony about the things you've gone through in your life. And these male pundits on Fox News are constantly talking about, they talk about an issue and they constantly bring it back to their lived experience. They constantly bring it back to their life. Donald Trump does this a lot, actually. If you see everywhere he goes, like, I know a guy here, and he always relates things to the social world. A lot of people that innovated that were daytime talk show women, right? That actually captured that style. So I think there's a way to like square the circle or do this populist style in a way that brings women in as opposed to alienates them. But I get it. There are like a lot of like Jane Cougar, if you're slamming your fists and you're ultra macho, you could turn off, a lot of women viewers. My mom would always watch Fox News because of her husband. He was a big NRA guy. And she'd always just say, I hate the yelling. I just hate all the yelling. So she did not like it at all. And so I could see, that as turning some, women viewers off.
Great. So we're going to wrap up. I'm going to make one quick comment here, and we're a bit over time, but thanks for folks who've stuck with it so far. Great program, Reece. Thanks so much. For people interested in that question about kind of the differences in both aesthetic and style on the one hand and substance on the other between working class women and men, one interesting book that looks at that to some degree is Trump's Democrats, which looked at three Democratic strongholds, have been Democratic strongholds for generations, literally, that switched for Trump in 2016. Kentucky, Rhode Island, and Iowa were the three places they looked at. And one of the things that Stephanie Moravchik, the author, found was that the very, very combative, tough guy, punch back 3 times as hard as you were punched style of Trump actually had about as much appeal and resonance with the women in those communities as with the men. So I think, again, we can't make too many assumptions about that. Okay, so your last shot here is this recurring question, which is, what, if anything, can an individual do to take what you've taught us and try to do something productive with?
Oh man, that's the hardest question. You saved it for the end.
Yes.
You saved it for the end. I mean, I think at an individual level, you know, I'm always interested in these big movements and these big party machineries and media companies, and you know how you create a kind of media revolution. And so I need to grapple with this more. What does an individual do? I think doing what you're doing right now, being a part of Ruby, being a part of not just saying I'm going to check out and not have any civic life, but I'm going to find organizations that I can find my fellow neighbors and talk about politics and try to make an impact on policy, on elections, on maybe union organizing. And so I think just being a part of something that's not your family and not your job and not you just checking out and watching your favorite series, I think it's engaging in civic life, right? In some form or fashion. And, you know, maybe becoming a media creator yourself. You know, that's what's amazing about YouTube. It's relatively low cost to start a channel. And, you know, it is not like, it's not like a most likely thing that happened, but it is amazing that a lot of these people that I'm studying on YouTube started from nothing and now they have millions of subscribers, right? So never self-select out, never assume that your voice is not going to be appealing. And in fact, because your voice is different from the overly polished style of the mainstream media, might be precisely why people like it, right? So, you know, you never know. You too can start your own, you know, engage in the broader discourse through media as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Reece. Thanks to everybody who has been participating. A lot of really, really thoughtful questions, both in the chat and verbalized. Terrific. We will see you next month on the first Wednesday in July. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't recall what our program is then. Jackie, do you happen to have that handy? No. Okay. We will figure that out. Everybody will see it through the newsletter. And again, appreciate all the support here for Ruby. And thanks so much to Reece for a fantastic presentation. Everybody,
great questions, everyone. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.